On today's show, we're joined by longtime NHL YouTuber Nathan Graviteh.
Nathan tells us all about the WisconSens and how he feels about the Ottawa Senators prospect pipeline.
This is Brady Tkachuk, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
Your Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome! You are locked on to the Ottawa Senators, the only daily podcast covering the Sens. On the outskirts of enemy territory, I'm Ross Levitan, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just head to FanDuel to get started. Today is Monday, July 7th, and Pilsy, would you bet on this? Alan Walsh, longtime NHL player agent, says he believes that trade activity is going to pick up this week.
Well, interesting to hear that from a player agent, more specifically Alan Walsh. We'll see if that comes true. I hope it does. Ross, would I bet on it? Yeah, I would bet on it. I'm looking at Puckpedia right now, and there's 5 teams that still are over the projected cap, and 4 more teams that have less than $1 million in cap space. So I feel like there's still going to be some jostling of position, teams trying to get more flexibility, rebuilding teams trying to get good deals on maybe some bad contracts, maybe accept sweetener draft picks along the way. So we'll see what happens. But hey, I love trades, so I hope Alan Walsh is right.
On Twitter, he says that the most common comment from NHL teams right now is that we have the cap dollars, but no players to spend them on. That's his reasoning for thinking that the trade market will heat up soon. Now, later this week, we'll discuss whether the Senators should be involved in this or should it be status quo heading into next season, which would leave the Senators with a fair number of cap space. They would have approximately $4.3 million. That's what they've got right now. Now, they do only have 39 contracts signed. There are 4 RFAs, so we expect that number to climb to 43, but the maximum is 50. And we'll talk later in the show after our interview about how the Ottawa Senators have created even more flexibility while also keeping depth in Belleville. But Pillsy, this is a fun conversation with Nathan Graviteh. I didn't realize he lives in Madison, Wisconsin. He's got connections to the university, the hockey team. He's got boots on the ground there for just about every home game. And he is a big Logan Hensler guy. So I think this is a good firsthand look at what we should expect to see. Not only what we saw last season with Hensler, but what he thinks will happen this upcoming season.
Yeah, Ross, back-to-back episodes where we have guys in their early 20s that are way smarter than us when it comes to covering prospects and covering the draft. If you haven't checked out Friday's episode with our friend Sebastian High, go check that out. And Nathan does an exceptional job covering the draft as well. And he puts the time in watching these guys. So a lot of great info. And from a Madison resident, he got to see some live viewings of the WisconSens, as we're now calling them. So definitely we're glad that he was able to hop on an episode with us.
So let's get to that right now. Here's our conversation with Nathan Graviteh.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following all the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach or at the lake. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups. The Toronto Blue Jays are hot right now, and I've been following along with them on FanDuel, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the 9th inning or even extra innings, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm a part of the action. And there's no better time to sign up. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open up the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started.
All right, we now welcome a very, very special guest. If you have youtube.com and you're a hockey fan, you've seen his content. We're now joined by Nathan Grav, better known as Graviteh. I'm calling it in Canadian. Is it Graviteh or Graviteh?
You got it right. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, we appreciate you jumping on. You are a Madison, Wisconsin resident. You are also a Logan Hensler fan. We'll get to all that, but obviously you've made quite the name for yourself on YouTube, starting it at 2017 and working your way up to the audience you have now. You've had opportunities to work with Sportsnet, among other big organizations. Take us through how it all started. Like, where did you get the inspiration and the drive to pump out the amount of content you do on the wide range of coverage that you provide?
Yeah, I mean, thank you boys for talking about that, because I was telling you guys before that making my channel, as soon as I was allowed to make a Gmail account, I was just like, okay, I'm going to start making YouTube videos. Since basically I was born into this earth, I was like watching TV a ton, watching, of course, sports broadcasts. Like, I wanted to talk about sports. I wanted to do something more than just sit there and consume. And especially watching YouTube more and more right before I started making my channel. Of course, beauties like Steve Dangle were big ones, and even YouTube channels like Post to Post that were really starting to like cover more general hockey topics. Was something that I didn't realize I could do until I wanted to do it. Originally starting out, I didn't even start doing hockey videos. I started doing baseball for the Texas Rangers, and just kind of, I will be honest to Steve, kind of copying the Steve Dangle LFR, but for the Texas Rangers for a bit, because the Rangers sucked so badly at that time. It was just kind of like it was middling returns for me in terms of like my enjoyment putting into it. But at that point, I was really getting way more into hockey than I had baseball before. Especially as the Stars just got more interesting, especially around 2016. That team I absolutely adored. So eventually I started doing that for the Stars, and then started just doing more general NHL content. And then that kind of became one of the most fun parts about it. Obviously, I still like talking about the Stars, but I just love talking about new trades and signings and whatever happens in the NHL, coaching changes, just anything that's changing through the league, anything that's different. I just wanted to make videos about it. And especially rankings, as I got to go further in, was like the biggest thing. I've ranked so much stuff over my life. It might be a problem, but like I've always been super into like tier lists and rankings and top 10s and stuff like that. So that was something that naturally came about. And I think that's kind of the big thing that a lot of my channel's videos are based upon, is just ranking whatever you can think of, basically. And it's been a ton of fun, especially going into more of the prospect landscape, and especially over these last 3 or 4 years, actually being able to watch a bulk of the NHL draft class, being able to really get a good handle on them, and actually be able to give my thoughts on those. Because I feel like for a lot of the general public, there's not a lot of people that are putting out content that actually watch the prospects consistently. You'll have people that, of course, are scouts and people that put out lists, but that might be it. You know what I mean? So there's not like a consistent like face or somebody that, or a personality that's really always talking about prospects out there. So I think, especially for me, to be able to kind of cast that net and to be able to give info to people that might not have it. That's the biggest thing to me, is that I remember back in like 2018, 2019, like when the Stars would make a draft selection, like wanting to know what these prospects were all about and not really having too much out there to glean on. So I think just being able to teach people about these classes, teach people about these prospects, is something that I have a lot of pride in, and I absolutely adore doing.
Yeah, I just watched some of your draft videos, Nathan. You do a great job covering the draft. We love covering the draft as well. It's fascinating. So let's get into the 2025 draft. First off, what were your expectations for the Ottawa Senators going into this draft? But because I don't know if you've noticed, but Ross and I, we did a deep dive on the history of the Ottawa Senators draft. We went back to 2020 and looked, okay, what type of players do they like? Where do they like taking players? And the one pattern and trend we noticed was size. It's all about size. So what were your expectations for the Sens coming into this draft?
I mean, Brandon, you hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, it was interesting because we've seen a lot of changes in the Sens management recently, of course, for the last couple of seasons. So I wasn't expecting, 2021 draft type of horrificness. But I think for the Senators case, I was kind of optimistic slightly, especially with the options that would have been available to them at what was the 21st overall pick. Because this draft is so varied, so widespread, I feel like there was opportunities for a bunch of reaches in that 20 range. But I just had a feeling about Ottawa, they would do something just a little bit more safe, a little bit more dependable, and not take a huge swing, but still take a solid player. I think I had them taking Shane Van Sage, who ultimately went to Philadelphia, but that was somebody that I thought was just going to fit that bang and crash, simplistic game that Ottawa might have liked. I'm a big fan of him. I don't think he should have gone in the second round, so it wouldn't have been a huge reach for me, but I think for other people, it might have been a bit of a surprise. But something like that, somebody that is simplistic, somebody that can play a position need for them a little bit on that right wing going forward. So I wasn't quite expecting Hensler especially to be available at that spot, let alone being available to when the Sens traded down at 23. So to see that actually be the reality, it might not have been the Sens' actual realistic game plan. They might have just thought that Hensler might have been taken by then. I certainly would have, especially after that Columbus pick at 20. That was like, there's no way Hensler is going after that, because Columbus has a lot of ties to Hensler, not to Hensler, but to the Wisconsin system. Montreal did, of course, but then they traded their 2 first-round picks. So it made a little bit more sense that Hensler would slip after that. But to see him go not just to the Sens' first pick, but to see them trade back and still get him, I think was we'll get into it, of course, but I think a pretty big success.
Yeah, and then you add on the fact that the extra pick they acquired to move down 2 spots, they end up flipping to LA for Jordan Spence, and they end up with 2 right shot defensemen in the deal when you look at them taking Logan Hensler. Before we get to Hensler himself, I know you do a ton of coverage on the draft, as we discussed. So with that, do you believe in premium positions in the draft, like centerman and right shot defenseman? Do you think those are more important to take in the first round?
Well, I think it's interesting because my answer would be different now than if I was running a team. Because if you're running a team, you're trying to go for those premium positions. You have to worry about what the options are going forward, how much of a premium you're going to have to pay for those positions going forward. I don't really factor it too much into my rankings or one or the other. It might depend if it's like a smaller winger versus a big defenseman, and they're both in the exact same talent tier. Then I might prefer the defenseman if I'm a team again drafting for a position of need. For me, I think it goes because of how much it affects teams. I feel like that's maybe the biggest difference between public rankings, stuff that people put out, and what the teams like specifically. Because I know there's teams out there, especially in the top 5, that know, hey, we're second overall. We're not going to be able to get a Matthew Schaefer if you're San Jose. So Schaefer is going to be lower in the ranking in the San Jose Sharks rankings than they would be for other teams. So it does depend quite a bit on the situations, on everything. But I think for me personally, I just usually just go best player available. To me, I think nowadays, smaller players go a little bit more undervalued than usually is. I mean, in this last class, I will say there wasn't a ton of very exciting smaller players, but for me personally, yes, even though centers and defensemen, they are more valuable and should be carrying a little bit more weight. I try not to let that affect the rankings too much, especially since there were a ton of prospects in this class that played center and wing. Guys like Anton Frundell, guys like Bill Zonin, who of course went to the Pittsburgh Penguins. There was a lot of guys that could play both positions. And I think that versatility also does boost it up a bit for me. But I think personally, you just got to go best player available most of the time.
Yeah, I just ask because this organization now under new management has had 2 first-round picks and have taken a right shot defenseman with both of them. Billsy?
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that right shot defenseman then. What is it about Logan Hensler that you like so much?
Yeah, for me, it was interesting because he came into the year as a top 5, top 6 guy for me in my rankings. And even though he did eventually slip more to the 15 range, it wasn't because of Hensler, more so just other prospects impressing just a little bit more and being a little bit more, bringing a little bit more pop throughout the season. But to me, Logan Hensler is somebody that I think largely goes undervalued when you look at public rankings, at the consensus around him, because of the point numbers. And this is the thing that I think is the biggest misconception, is that Hensler was never going to be able to put up a point per game, like type of Z Buum production that we saw in last year's draft. That was never going to happen because Wisconsin specifically is very strange when it comes to the production around the team. Especially in Mike Hastings' system, head coach for Wisconsin, it's very forward oriented, the offense. There's not a lot of defense from the back end, especially up the rush and transition. That's just not quite the style they play. It's more so the hard work and the dirty work being made by the forwards and a lot of the scoring coming from them. So even though the defensemen help and Hensler had a big part in the offense, a lot of the times there were third assists that didn't get counted, times where Hensler would start the rush up, start in transition, get the puck out of the zone, and then the forwards would eventually finish the play. So in a lot of cases, there were times where if Hensler were on a Denver or a Michigan, for example, he would be a lot more involved with the actual scoring on the ice. And that might be a downside or a good thing. I think in Hensler's case, it's made him have to adapt his game a bit more. In the NTDP, he was a lot more of a rush defenseman, a lot more of like a Quinn Hughes, not up to that level, but something that was really producing his value of how he was rushing up the ice, how he was using his skating. In Wisconsin, though, he had to adapt a little bit more, really boost that defensive game, get a lot more physical. He actually use that body in more creative ways. I mean, that's the biggest thing to me that I think is such a helpful thing for prospects in the NCAA. You can't be a one-dimensional player, especially in Wisconsin. That system needs you to be a all-around defenseman, needs you to really pick up the pace in all three zones. And I think that was a good thing for him ultimately, because especially in the second half of the season, his defensive game got way more confident. And especially in transition, there was points where he was able to rush up the ice with his skating and actually enter the offensive zone quite a few times in those last few games. And that was a stark difference from the confidence level of Hensler at the beginning of the year. So I think, especially when you're looking for players to project to the pro level, the Big Ten, NCHC, these are divisions that require you to be at your best at a level that is basically the closest you can get to the NHL without playing pro hockey anywhere else.
So we know that he's an elite skater. You mentioned defends a lot better. Do you think that there is reasonable expectation that the offense should pop a little bit more next season as a sophomore?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in the Wisconsin system too, you didn't just see a difference in the confidence of Hensler, but also the deployment of him. He got a lot more time on the power play, and that was something that I thought really showed well throughout the course of the season. The deceptiveness on the blue line, and we'll talk about Hensler's actual on ice characteristics here. I mean, the skating, as you mentioned, is the biggest thing. He's somebody that can get out of pressure so easily when he's using his skating, when he is on the go. And especially in transition, this to me is going to be the biggest thing that I love about the Hensler pick for Ottawa. I've mentioned it before, but to me, I think Carter Yakemchuk specifically projects more as you're in the offensive zone. You need to bomb from the point. Yakemchuk is going to be able to bring that, the physicality that he has, and the big hits, the big moments. That's what Yakemchuk, I think, is going to bring with the excitement he's able to collect for himself. In Hensler's case, though, he's a lot more of a transition defenseman, somebody that can get you out of the defensive zone easily. And even though he does have a pretty good shot from the point, a lot more of his offense is playmaking, especially from the perimeter, getting it to the slot, making it easy for his teammates. And I think those two defensemen, they're both pretty different. And I think that'll ultimately be good for the Sens top four, because you're going to have a guy that brings a different game than the other. And especially in Hensler's case, he is so good at making that dirty work look easy out of the defensive zone. And I think especially for a team like Ottawa, or for any team really, any team could use a defenseman like that. And I think even if the offense, I don't quite see as more than maybe like a 40, 50 point guy, I think the defense you're getting on top of that makes it more than worth it. And I think because he's more of a transition defenseman, a lot of the points that other defensemen would get naturally don't quite come. But I think he will be one of those defensemen you watch, you see, that brings so much value that doesn't end up on the score sheet necessarily. That's the type of defenseman I see Hensler being.
Yeah, I think those are fair points. And I'm excited to watch Logan Hensler a little bit more closely here, especially since he's just one of the 4 Sens prospects that are going to be playing on the Wisconsin Badgers next year. Nathan, I want to get into another Sens prospect that's heading there. Someone we're very excited about. We've had him on the show already. It's Blake Montgomery. And he's no stranger to switching leagues, as he went from the USHL with the Lincoln Stars, where he had pretty decent amount of success, to the London Knights after only 10 games last season, and he had a awesome season. I mean, the London Knights had a great year, and he was a big part of that. How do you think he's going to be able to transition to the NCAA? Or I guess, do you think it'll pose challenges, or it might take him a little while to adjust to the different style of game from the OHL?
I mean, that's the thing to me, is that I think Blake Montgomery was a pro player playing junior hockey. If I had to explain it, I think he's somebody, like you guys mentioned, just an absolute beauty of a guy from everything I've heard, everything I've seen. He was somebody that I adored when the Sens made that pick. He was easily my favorite pick of last year's draft for them. But it's because of the versatility in his game. He's a bigger player. He has physicality. He's great on the puck and great at protecting it. But he also has so much skill in one-on-one situations. And it's somebody, especially around the net, that is able to deceive, able to get some free space pretty easily. In London, it was an interesting spot because he comes, like you said, into the year not fully starting on the roster, but right there in it. Immediately is able to win a ton of minutes. Looked like he never even was anywhere else to start the season. Just looked immediately perfect with London. And I think he was just a man playing against boys, truly. I mean, even though the point production isn't unbelievable or anything, what he was good at doing, he was exceptional at doing. And that role he played for London was instrumental to a lot of their success. I thought it was great at the playoffs too. Even again, if the point numbers don't pop out, it's funny talking about this now because I think he's another one, kind of like Hensler, where I don't think I see unbelievable production at the next level, but a 30-point guy that again does a lot of the dirty work, especially around the net, is somebody that brings really underrated skill for a big boy like that. Just somebody that might not have the unbelievable production, but does a lot of things that you need on a winning team.
Now, does that mean Wisconsin's a good place for him? Like, if you were in charge of developing Blake Montgomery and you know he already kind of has that potential, would you be looking to try to get him more offensive opportunities? Could Wisconsin be a higher scoring team this year than they have in the past? Or do you believe that going to a place where they'll focus on his strengths will just make him that much better at that and ultimately have a better chance of being an NHL regular?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm biased since I love anybody that chooses Wisconsin, but I'll say this. I think it's an interesting debate, working on the strengths versus the weaknesses. I think if there's one thing that Wisconsin system does well is it emulates what the NHL is more like. It emulates the physicality that you are required to have. It emulates the intensity you're required to have. In Montgomery's case, I think the big thing that I kind of wanted to see more of is more pace to his game, more consistency every single shift. And I think that's something that Wisconsin, again, needs you to have an everyday big position in the lineup. And that was something that Tyson Dick, Senators prospect, really improved upon over the last year to get a full-time spot this last season, was that intensity, was that work ethic, and really making sure that every time he was going onto the ice, he was creating value for his team. I'm not worried about Montgomery in that case. I know he will do that. I think the big thing that Montgomery really kind of fills in the whole of Wisconsin is that goal scoring and how good of a knack for the net he has. Having that type of big body that can do that consistently was something that Wisconsin kind of missed last year. So I think having that extra link, I think the Badgers will be better this next season. Last year was just kind of a weird thing where you have a head coach, Mike Hastings, a lot of his players that weren't his players left before the year. So it was kind of a season setup for failure. This year, though, you have players that he has recruited like Montgomery coming into the fold and actually playing big time roles. So I'm not really worried about Montgomery getting ice time. I think the big thing for him, though, is you obviously play as a pro against junior players. Having that intensity ramped up is, I think, the biggest challenge for a lot of players entering the NCAA. But I think that is the biggest thing I want to see Montgomery improve upon. So I think even though, you might want to go to maybe a system that's more free flowing, I think also having the opportunity and the challenge that comes with the NCAA while having that kind of more strict play, more balanced, more pro ready hockey, I think will be ultimately a good mix for him.
Okay, you really quelled my concerns there because when we saw Blake Montgomery in London, he was more of a utility player with the Knights. Obviously, They had their high-end scorers, but then when all of those guys went to the World Juniors, he had a top-line role and produced almost 2 points a game during that stretch. So you see Blake Montgomery next season under Mike Hastings as a guy who's going to be a top-line player, going to get power play role as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think second line immediately, and I think he has room to grow into especially more of a power play one spot. I mean, I think for him too, when you look at the offense and when you look at the team in general, it's kind of starved for these bigger guys that can also produce like Montgomery can. So like you said, Ross, I think filling that hole, he filled it pretty well in London, but that hole is going to be a lot bigger in Wisconsin to really be a perfect match, I personally think. We'll have to wait and see, but I think Monty's going to do great things.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm stoked for him to keep things going. Now let's get to the third guy going to the Wisconsin Badgers. Probably my favorite pick of the draft, and that's Bruno Idzan.
We're going to find out later. No spoilers, but Bruno's going to join us next Thursday.
My girlfriend has told me to tell you guys that in terms of the pronunciation, this is one that I've also struggled with, but I think it's important to say it's Bruno Idzan.
Idzan. Okay.
As of right now, you guys can ask him. Maybe it's changed, but Idzan, just basically imagine E and then June, but G-U-N. And there you go.
Bruno Idzan.
Yes.
Hey, way to go.
There you go, Brandon. There you go.
It's a fun name. I mean, Bruno, guy from Croatia. I believe he was the first Croatian-born player drafted into the NHL, I believe, a 6th round pick by the Ottawa Senators. And to go from playing in the Alps Hockey League in Croatia and then going to the USHL and seemingly not struggling at all, in fact, dominating 44 points in 36 games with the Lincoln Stars, and he heads to University of Wisconsin. What are your expectations for Bruno?
Bruno is a fascinating guy, man. I learned about him first, like once he's officially entered the USHL this year. It's so interesting because he's somebody that, like you said, the Alps Hockey League is not a big name brand league or anything, but he is playing against still pretty pro competition, bigger competition. So at that age, it does teach you quite a bit. But he was unbelievable there, over a goal per game. And then, right, like you said, comes to the USHL. And I would say people might look at the production and see a pretty good player. He was I think, stepped into the USHL and was probably a top 3, maybe top 2 offensive player in that league immediately. The goal scoring, the power play finish, it was unbelievable how efficient this player was. If he just got a centimeter of space, he was able to make the most of it and just weaponize that entire league's goaltending. It was unbelievable to watch. And like you said, I mean, the production speaks for itself. 44 points, 22 goals in 36 games. The USHL, I don't think people realize, if you're a point per game in that league, you are an elite player. You are doing unbelievable things. So the fact that he was almost 10 points above a point per game is silly production. Obviously, is a little older as an overager, but this guy has improved leaps and bounds over where he was just this time last year. And to see that strength come a long way too, that's I think the biggest thing that has really propelled him to I think more of a pro projection is how much his conditioning has improved, how much the pace has improved, on top of course, the goal scoring that is fantastic. It's not just the goal scoring is good, the shot is good. It's how he sees the game, how his sense of space is. It's almost like his brain has improved by like 5 years over the last season. It's incredible to watch him. And like you said, I think he was also, even though I love the Hensler pick and a couple others in the draft, I think for them, him at 181 is unbelievable value. This was somebody I ranked in my first 2 rounds because of the improvement, because it's still, I think, the runway to go. This is somebody that I think, especially like we talked about with Montgomery filling a hole, Wisconsin is they kind of have a hole still, even with Montgomery, for power play goal scorers, guys that can just finish the plays. It was a big problem throughout this last season for Wisconsin. They have a lot of playmakers and guys that can create, but not enough to finish. And I think Bruno's going to step into the lineup pretty immediately, be a solid producer. Might not be, an elite guy in year 1, but I think year 2 comes around, and that's where you see Bruno be like a point per game type of guy for Wisconsin. Even though the offense isn't massive for them, the big guys on the Badgers do get big amounts of points. Islanders prospect Quinn Finley, big driver of play. He still is producing at major levels. So once Bruno gets even that extra little bit of ice time, I think he's going to be a good producer for them. And they've been craving somebody like Bruno for a while. And like you said, too, the first Croatian, I think he is the first Croatian born to actually be drafted in the NHL. There's a couple others that played for Croatia, but were from Canada. So the fact that he's paving his way and is also really good to boot, I think is going to be really fun to keep an eye on.
Hell yeah. Well, you piqued my interest there, saying if you're over a point per game in the USHL, you're good. The last time the Senators drafted that type of player was in 2022, where Stephen Halliday was second in the USHL with 95 points. Pillsy, 60 assists, a disher. Although he added 35 goals with it. Grav, I want your take on the Sens prospect pool. We saw your video ranking all 32 teams. You had the Ottawa Senators coming in at number 21. What was the reasoning for that? And what is your overall impression on the next wave? Understanding, obviously, as you do, that the Senators NHL roster is compiled mostly of draft picks between 2018 and 2020. Those, especially 2020, obviously. But how do you think they've reloaded here now in the last couple drafts for the next wave?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, Ross, is that I think the depth is maybe the biggest thing holding them back, since they had a couple of drafts that also weren't great since 2020, but also a couple of drafts where they didn't draft too much. So, I'll give them a pass on that specific one. I mean, you had the Hoyt Stanley draft where they drafted in the 4th round. That was their first pick of the draft. So it's hard when you have those type of classes to be, especially in the top 15, where a lot of these teams are rebuilding or have had just wealth of draft picks. You have a team like Carolina that drafts like 12 times a year. It's hard to compete with teams like that, especially since the Sens, a big thing that has kind of held their prospect pool back is that a lot of the top prospects have graduated on the NHL and have become really solid players. So it's a nice problem to have. I don't think it's the end of the world for them, but I could pretty easily see them being top 20 after next year with the depth they're starting to accumulate again. Like you said, though, I think these last couple of drafts have been really interesting for them, getting some really cool talent. Last year, I thought it was a mix of a Yakemchuk, which I wouldn't have maybe taken at that spot, but still has some NHL talent for sure, and a couple of draft picks like Javon Moore and Blake Montgomery, who I like a lot. And this year was kind of the big draft where I'm like, okay, I pretty much like every single pick that was made. Like, we might not even talk about him, but players like Lucas Beckman, I think, were solid value. Dimitri Isay, of having a 140 pounder drafted from Russia by the Ottawa Senators.
Crazy.
Is amazing. I love that. Is hilarious to me. But I love seeing the Senators, show us that they can be a little bit different than the strategy that they've shown. I think that is actually pretty good for their future. Obviously, they still want to go for size. There's still going to be great players available, but I like they're trying to dig for some diamonds in the rough here and there, and I appreciate that a lot too. So I think for Ottawa, they're a team that I'm starting to, obviously with all the Wisconsin guys, I like seeing that a ton. So that boosts them quite a bit. But I think for Ottawa, there is just a lot of players that fill needs for this team. That's the biggest thing that I think is solid about the Sens pool, is they're not just throwing darts. They're looking for players that will fill the roles they need. They already have their core locked up pretty much, but right defense is a need. You're going to have Yakemchuk and Hensler coming into the fold. You have a little bit of need on a bottom 6 with players like Montgomery, I think, being basically perfect third line power play options in the future. So you have a lot of guys that I think will fill specific roles and do really good at doing that.
And for those Sens fans who are getting mad at lists, which we love to do on this show, I went back and found Nathan's 2020 prospect pool rankings, where the Ottawa Senators were at number 2 behind the LA Kings after that loaded 2020 draft class. Nathan, we got to address the allegation. Just one, but we put out the tweet at Sens Central yesterday. You're coming on the show today, and someone said you're a Sens hater. My goodness.
Uh-oh.
Oh my gosh.
How often does that happen? Obviously, covering the league as a whole, I'm sure every fan base has their moments getting mad at you.
Ross, I can only think of a couple teams where I don't think I've ever been called a hater of them. Montreal, probably. Actually, no, wait a second. I have been called a hater of Montreal, even though I like a ton of their moves.
We've never been called haters of Montreal, just for the record. Never.
And the Leafs. You guys love the Leafs. Basically every single team you can think of, I've probably been called a hater of them. It's just the thing when, especially when you try to go from an unbiased view and literally just look at every single team. If you don't like a specific move that gets made, obviously people are going to say something like that. I just kind of take it in jest at this point because I think it's kind of funny. But in the Sens case, yes, there's been a couple of draft picks that I wasn't like, okay, this wasn't the move that I would have made. And I will say I've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years, being a lot more level-headed when the actual draft picks get made. And in the Sens case, yes, even though I wasn't a big fan of their 2021 draft, which I don't know about that one. That's pretty much the one time I feel like I've been harsh against the Ottawa Senators, really. Besides that, especially these last couple of seasons, I think their drafts have had some pretty good draft picks all around. I like the direction the team's heading. I really liked them this last year. I was really hoping they would take that next step, and of course they end up doing so. I don't purposely try to hate anybody unless they try to purposely hate me, then maybe I will. But I just try to be as level-headed as I can, as unbiased as I can. And just, especially for me, the last thing I want to do is have a prospect be drafted high and be like, okay, now they're drafted high, I now need to like them. I now need to be okay with the pick. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where Flyers fans probably call me a hater because I didn't really like the Jack Nesbitt pick from this last year. We go into cycles where it's not because he was drafted by the Flyers. It was because I ranked him 50th overall and he went 12th. It's one of those situations where it's not team based. It's more so decision based, which for the Senators, they made some good moves. They made some bad ones, just like everybody over the last half decade. So you're going to come into situations like that. But you know what, Sens fans, I love you guys. I love the discussion too, because it's been honestly pretty fascinating to see, okay, where the Senators coming from their perspective, trying to glean from that, trying to change how I think because of that and understand it a little bit more. So honestly, it's actually been productive. So I appreciate it a lot. And especially over the last few years, you guys are doing pretty well for yourselves prospect wise. So I wouldn't worry about it one bit.
Yeah, we've done a lot of growing in that aspect as well, as the Sens have famously picked usually the players I have ranked lowest or lower on my list. And it's tough because, like I was mentioning it, you can't just be like, oh, this guy's good, this guy's good, this guy's good, and every single player you just want to be nice to, and they're good. Right. You have to have opinions on what you like, what you don't like, and then the cards will fall where they will. We were a little lower on Jack Nesbitt ourselves, Nathan, so I can appreciate that. Now, final question for me, and this is an important one. We had 4 players playing in North Dakota for the Sens, so we coined them the Nodak Sens. Now, I was using the new hashtag WisconSens, but I noticed you go for the hashtag WiscoSens. Where are we landing on this? Because I don't want to have dividing hashtags here and we're just going up against each other. I want to be in unity, in lockstep on our new college affiliate hashtag. So you tell me, Nathan.
Well, Brandon, I'm going to disappoint you because I didn't even notice that I did.
Oh, well, I thought you did that for a reason. I was like, oh, man, no. The new hashtag.
I mean, WiscoSens does roll off the tongue just slightly better. So if you wanted to go from that perspective, then I think you could do that. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's going to like dial it down from the middle second and see exactly how you pronounced it and take offense to that, Brandon. But I mean, WisconSens does make more sense in terms of how you spell it and how you would actually write it. But WiscoSens sounds better to say. So for a podcast format, you might prefer that. So it's up to you. I'm putting the question back to you, Brandon.
Oh, the reverse Uno on the question here. Ross, you have to decide.
Yeah, I think I go with WisconSens.
Okay, WisconSens.
Yeah,
all right.
Let's check in on our WisconSens.
Let's put a poll on Twitter. We'll get the people to decide. If the three of us don't have the power to choose, the good people of Twitter always.
Well, I know our guy Chase, who we met at the game in Minnesota a couple years ago, his username or his @ on Twitter is WiscoSens fan. So he is definitely voting one way. Final question for me, Nathan. We appreciate you joining us. Everybody's already subscribed to you on Twitter @ Graviteh. Follow him on social media on Twitter @ Nathan Graviteh. Nathan, we had Sebastian High from Elite Prospects, who also does work with us here, Locked On NHL Prospects, and he threw out a debate that we did not even see possible, saying that Logan Hensler is a better prospect than Carter Yakemchuk. I know you love Logan Hensler. Would you go that far? And how would you rank the top 2 prospects in the Senators system?
That is, Sebastian, that is a sneaky one.
That's spicy.
Yeah, that is a sneaky one. That is fascinating. This is the weird part to me, is that this is the funny part, is that I was debating with Sebastian at the start of the year, Hensler or Schaefer, heading into the season, and he was Team Schaefer, I was Team Hensler. So to see him be that high on Hensler, is pretty fun to hear about. Biasedly, I would probably say slightly Hensler, but objectively, like especially looking at the draft classes themselves, I had Yakemchuk probably more so in like the late teens last year, Hensler around 15, 16s. But the fact that the draft classes are such a stark difference to me, I think personally, just looking back on how I view each prospect, the projections and everything, I do think Yakemchuk by just a hair would be my pick. But I think Yakemchuk also is probably going to play in a more premium spot in the Sens position. I think he's going to be playing maybe not more minutes, but more offensive minutes, probably put up better totals, especially on the power play. So I think he's going to be looked at as the number 1 eventually, while Hensler's more of the 1B or just 2 guy behind him. So I'm going to say just barely Yakemchuk taking a shot at Sebastian. Not really, but I think it's a close debate. I really like that question, though, because there's not much of a difference between them. I love my Henny, but I think Yakemchuk just barely would take it for me.
Yeah, I think to me the decider is, and I know it's NHL preseason, but 7 points in 4 games, including an overtime winner where he went through Matthews, Marner, and Jake McCabe, dangled them, and went back post and in. I mean, that in itself. And then I ended the whole debate, basically a half-hour debate, saying, you know what, Sens fans, you got both of them. So my follow-up to that then is, put your 2030 goggles on. Both players are developed. Let's say it's reasonably in the middle of the high and low end of what they can be as players. Who pairs better with Jake Sanderson between Yakemchuk and Hensler?
Yakemchuk easily. That I don't even have to think about that.
He's the yin to his yang.
Even though he wouldn't be my comparison for Hensler quite, I think Hensler is extremely similar to Sanderson, where he's somebody that isn't going to put up the Quinn Hughes type of numbers, but the work he does on the ice with his skating, with how mature he is defensively, leads to so much success on the ice. Like it reminds me so much of a Hensler if Hensler does reach his peak. So to me, you go for the difference. You go for somebody that can do something differently than Sanderson, 100%. But that's why I like the Hensler pick so much, is that you kind of have like a Sanderson light on your second pair for the entire rest of his career. Yet you also have the Yakemchuk there to do something a little bit differently, be more of a producer than a Sanderson, and also be able to finish a lot of the plays, the little detailing plays that Sanderson creates. So, I mean, it's a good problem to have for the Senators, but I think it's Sanderson, then Yakemchuk, then Shabbat, and then Hensler on your second pair officially.
Hell yeah. Well, Nathan, we really appreciate all the insight, the energy that you bring to the show, and we'd love to do this again down the road. I'm just noticing Sens jersey in the background, too. I mean, talk about pandering to the audience. We absolutely
I gotta get a new one, though.
Is there a name on that?
This is Kyle Turris.
WisconSens.
Yeah,
true.
Let's go. Got to get you a Danny Heatley throwback. Get you all the Wisconsin guys. Maybe a Brian Elliott jersey back there. We've got a little history with the University of Wisconsin, and we'll see if they can continue that with Hensler and with Blake Montgomery and with our guy Bruno and Tyson Dick. The WisconSens will be a blast to watch next season. We will put out the poll, by the way, at Sens Central. WisconSens, WisconSens. We will also be making sure to follow along with Nathan on his YouTube channel, Graviteh. Thanks for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Absolutely. Good luck to y'all. Good luck to the Sens next season. Going to be a bloodbath in the Atlantic, but I want you guys to make it again.
All right, Pillsy. So thank you to Nathan for joining us. You guys are already following him on YouTube. One of the most consistent deep dive channels online. So we thank him for coming on. We'll be catching up with him, I'm sure, as the WisconSens continue to mount up the Big Ten power rankings. Pillsy, the Ottawa Senators have created and kept more flexibility than I think a lot of fans had imagined when we talk about the Belleville Sens makeover. A pair of players, since we last recorded, have signed AHL-only contracts for next season who weren't qualified from Ottawa a couple weeks ago. So Jamieson Reese today and Philip Daou on Friday will be back in Belleville, but without the opportunity for a call-up.
Yeah, and I think this is a good move for both the team and the players. Both of them get to stay in Belleville. Young players, Jamieson Reese, 24 years old, Philippe Daou, only 23 years old. So you get to have a little stability staying in the town and in the team with your teammates and coaching staff that you're familiar with. And the Ottawa Senators, they're able to keep them there using the AHL deals. Ross, do you want to go into further detail what that means?
Yeah, so they can only play in Belleville, and any team in the National Hockey League has the opportunity to give them a standard NHL contract at any point. Now, that player would have to clear waivers, so if Ottawa wanted to then keep them, they could. However, they would have to be on a two-way deal and cost them a contract slot, which Ottawa's now keeping flexibility by not giving them that right now. So these players will be in Belleville, but not in the sense that if they play great or whatever the case may be, that they could earn a call-up to the NHL. So I just think this is a good way to keep depth in Belleville, but then be able to either take on player contracts throughout the season if they want to make moves to get better, or to then go out and get more players now this offseason. So I think this is a great bit of business for Steve Staios. And then if they like what they see in Belleville, they can always negotiate a two-way contract after that. So I think this is just another piece of the puzzle to Belleville, and I do not think that they're done. I do think we're still going to see a couple more centers being brought in, and maybe a couple defensemen as well. You can never have too much depth, obviously, with call-ups and injuries. We've seen over the course of time Belleville be decimated and be on their fourth, fifth call-ups from the ECHL and have to sign players to play small roles throughout the season. So I think bringing Dow and Reese back on these contracts is great. And then they're also bringing back Kean Washkurik, who, again, was on a one-way AHL deal last year and contributed for Belleville. So it's just a low-risk move that can pay dividends in terms of getting Belleville to the playoffs next season, which has to be the goal. It has to be the goal for Belleville to get playoff hockey. And even beyond that, I think it wouldn't be too much to ask for Belleville to be a Calder Cup contender, maybe not a favorite, but a contender to make a run as they're adding these mid-20, late 20, kind of quadruple A, to use a baseball term, players when you add Arthur Kaliev and Ole Lixell, guys who can and have played NHL games, but ultimately would be great AHL players.
Yeah, I think this offseason, at least so far, especially with Matt Turek, the new general manager of the Belleville Senators, has certainly been more underwhelming as far as getting those vet guys or big AHL names. And it's more been about trying to keep consistency and stability. And you're going to really see what some of these prospects have to offer, especially on the back end. They are very young on the back end, and these guys are going to have opportunities to play big roles on this Belleville team. So I think getting to the playoffs again will be the proper goal for the Belleville Senators.
Still 2 RFAs on the back end in Belleville, Donovan Sabrango and Max Gannett, and 2 up front with Jan Yannick and Xavier Bourgault. So we'll continue to follow that as things develop through the offseason. Any breaking news, you know where to find us here on Locked On Senators. And speaking of Belleville, how about Senators Dev Camp Jonathan Petra Award winner Oscar Pew Pew Pistol Pettersson will be joining us tomorrow on the show. So stay tuned for that. For today, we say goodbye. Thank you for watching, listening, and engaging with the show. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.